My name is Park Junho, 23 years old, 168 centimeters, 52 kilograms. Last kid picked for anything requiring a body that functions above baseline. First kid knocked over by a strong gust of wind during typhoon season. Yesterday, I pushed a falling shelving unit off myself at work, and something in my head exploded with blue light. Let me back up, because pushed a falling shelving unit undersells how unremarkable my life was before that moment. I work night shifts at a supermarket distribution warehouse in Incheon. Inventory management, which sounds official but means moving boxes from trucks to shelves and occasionally getting yelled at by day shift managers who consider efficient and not actively dying to be the same performance standard. I've held the job 2 years. Ever since my mother's kidneys started failing and dropped out of full-time work meant dropping out of her health insurance, which meant somebody needed a steady paycheck badly enough to accept 11-hour night shifts moving inventory that weighs more than I do. I'm not built for physical labor. I've never been built for anything physical. School gym class was a decade-long humiliation ritual where I finished every fitness test in last place by a margin substantial enough that teachers stopped bothering to hide their disappointment. My coworkers at the warehouse tolerate me with the specific tired condescension reserved for someone who tries hard and accomplishes little. Not cruel, just resigned, the way you'd regard a bicycle trying to keep up with highway traffic. I apologize for things constantly, for being slow, for needing help lifting boxes that anyone else handles alone, for existing in spaces where my physical inadequacy becomes inevitably someone else's problem to accommodate. 23 years of practice have made sorry the most natural word in my vocabulary. Last night, a storage shelf, improperly secured, overloaded with return merchandise nobody cataloged correctly, began tipping directly toward me while I crouched checking inventory tags at floor level. I had perhaps 1 second of reaction time, no room to simply step back, and every survival instinct my inadequate body possessed screaming the same message: push or get crushed. I pushed. Both hands, full body weight, everything my 52 kilograms could generate against a falling structure that outweighed me by a factor of 10. The shelf didn't stop. Physics doesn't care about desperation, but it shifted trajectory just enough that it crashed sideways rather than directly onto me, missing my legs by a margin that still makes my chest tight remembering it. And something in that exact instant of maximum physical effort activated. Blue light. Not visible to anyone else, apparently. My coworkers, rushing over after the crash, saw a shelf that fell wrong and a scrawny warehouse worker who got impossibly lucky, nothing more. But I saw a translucent window materialize in my vision, the specific interface aesthetic I vaguely recognize from Hunter live streams I've occasionally watched between shifts, wondering what it must feel like to be someone whose body actually works. Potential awakened, physical growth mechanic. Training to true muscular failure increases stats. Light training, minimal gain. Training to genuine failure, significant gain. Stats, strength/endurance/speed/reaction. Current, strength 3, endurance 2, speed 2, reaction 3. Average awakened baseline, strength 8 to 10. I stare at numbers that confirm what 23 years of gym class already established beyond reasonable doubt. I'm below average even by the standards of someone who's just discovered supernatural potential. Most awakened individuals, according to the Hunter forums I've half-followed for years, manifest an actual ability. Fire manipulation, enhanced senses, weapon affinity, something distinctive. I get you can get stronger if you exercise really hard, which is simultaneously the least magical superpower imaginable and, given my starting point, still a genuine miracle. The bitter irony isn't lost on me. Even my awakening arrived weak. I don't tell anyone. My supervisor writes up the shelf incident as equipment failure. I finish my shift with hands still shaking from adrenaline, and I go home to the one-room apartment I share with my mother's medical bills more than with my mother herself, since she's currently 3 weeks into a hospital stay for treatment adjustments. I test the system that night, alone, in the specific privacy that comes from having no one around to witness potential failure. Push-ups, the most basic exercise available to someone with zero equipment and zero athletic background. 5 repetitions, and my arms are already shaking with effort that would embarrass a much younger, much weaker version of myself, except I currently am that weaker version. So there's no embarrassment left to spare. Training detected below failure threshold, strength plus 0.0 nothing. I try again, pushing past the point where my arms first started shaking, continuing through burning muscle protest towards something that feels less like exercise and more like active self-destruction. 8 repetitions. 9. My arms give out entirely on the 10th attempt, chest hitting the floor because my body has genuinely, completely stopped being able to execute the movement regardless of how badly I want it to continue. Training to failure detected strength, plus 0.4 small, almost insultingly small, given how much that final repetition cost me in raw, burning effort. But real, measurable. The specific number climbing on a display only I can see, confirming that the exertion actually produced something rather than simply hurting for no reason at all. I do it again and again, not because I'm motivated by dreams of hunter glory. I've never once in 23 years imagined myself as someone capable of fighting monsters for a living, but because this is the first time in my entire life that trying hard has produced a result I can actually measure, rather than simply producing more evidence of my own inadequacy. I push through failure on push-ups, then squats, then a makeshift pull-up bar improvised from my apartment's doorframe, working until my body genuinely cannot continue rather than stopping at the first sign of discomfort, the way every physical education teacher I've ever had watched me quit far too early and assumed it reflected laziness rather than the specific, learned helplessness of someone who's never once succeeded at physical effort and therefore never learned what pushing past initial failure actually feels like. By dawn, exhausted beyond anything my body has previously experienced, I check the accumulated total: strength 3 to 6.2, endurance 2 to 4.8. Still pathetically low by any hunter standard, but more than doubled in a single night through nothing except willingness to hurt myself slightly more than instinct usually permits. I find a gym 3 days later, the cheapest one within walking distance of my apartment, the specific low-budget establishment that caters to people who can't afford better equipment or more encouraging trainers. The woman running the front desk and occasional training sessions introduces herself with the specific weary efficiency of someone who's seen this exact scenario play out many times before. Yoon Seoyeon, she says, barely looking up from her phone. D-rank hunter, part-time here because D-rank doesn't pay what people assume it does. You awakened recently? How did you know? You've got the look. Skinny kid, desperate eyes, decided exercise is going to fix everything a system message told you about your own potential. She finally looks at me properly, the specific professional assessment of someone evaluating a new variable. Most people like you last about 2 weeks before the actual difficulty of sustained training breaks the initial motivation. Sign up if you want. I won't stop you. I also won't pretend I expect you to still be here next month. Her cynicism doesn't sting the way it might have 3 days ago. I've absorbed considerably worse dismissals for considerably less reason my entire life. What's different now is the specific private knowledge that her assessment, however statistically reasonable, doesn't account for a variable she can't see. The blue window confirming in real numbers that every session of genuine effort produces genuine progress. I train every single day for the following month. Not lightly, to actual, complete failure every session, pushing past the exact point where my previous 23 years of learned helplessness would have told me to stop and rest. Seoyeon notices before I tell her anything. Not the system, which remains invisible to everyone except me, but the physical transformation that 4 weeks of failure threshold training produces in a body that started with essentially no baseline conditioning. The scrawny kid who could barely complete the gym's introductory assessment now working with weight loads that make her pause mid-conversation to actually watch. "What are you doing differently?" she asks, the specific tone shifting from routine trainer-client management to genuine professional curiosity than every other awakened kid who walks in here convinced training will fix everything. I push to failure. Every time. Most people stop at tired. You're saying you keep going past that? Yes. She studies me for a long moment, the specific reassessment of someone updating a prediction that's just been proven wrong by evidence she can directly observe. That's either genuinely useful discipline or you're going to seriously injure yourself, and possibly both simultaneously. Probably both. For the first time since we met, something that isn't cynical professional obligation crosses her expression. The specific flicker of interest that a trainer feels toward a client who might actually justify the effort of proper coaching rather than routine, disengaged supervision. "Show me your next set," she says. "Properly. I want to see this failure you keep talking about." I do. Full effort, no held-back reserve, the specific total commitment that 23 years of accumulated disappointment somehow, impossibly, transforms into fuel rather than obstacle once genuine progress becomes measurable. My arms give out on the final repetition, the specific complete muscular failure that's become, over 1 month, less a barrier to fear and more a threshold to actively pursue. Seo-yeon watches the whole sequence without interrupting, and when I finally collapse, breathing hard, unable to lift my arms above shoulder height, she doesn't offer the reflexive sympathy most people default to. "Again," she says, "after you recover. I want to see if that's actually your limit or just the limit you've decided to accept." I look up at her. Someone who 3 weeks ago gave me 2 weeks before predicted failure, now watching with the specific professional attention of someone reconsidering an entire assessment based on evidence rather than statistical assumption. "Yes," I say, again. The blue window flickers in my peripheral vision, patient and quiet, waiting for whatever comes next. 23 years of being last, weakest, most easily dismissed. One shelving unit, one moment of desperate physical effort, and a mechanic so simple it almost insults the concept of supernatural potential. Push until you genuinely cannot continue, and something, however small, grows anyway. I don't know yet what this becomes. I don't know yet about tournaments, about corrupt guilds, about the specific national attention that a abilityless hunter eventually draws from a country obsessed with flashy elemental talents. I know in this exact moment only that failure, genuine, complete, muscle-shaking failure, has stopped being the humiliating conclusion of every physical effort I've ever attempted. It's become, for the first time in my life, a starting point. Seo-yeon introduces me to Han Dae-ho 3 weeks after she starts actually paying attention to my training rather than merely supervising it. "He's retired," she explains, walking me toward the gym's back office. Former A-rank spinal injury 5 years ago ended his active career. He still consults sometimes when something interesting enough crosses his radar. "You've apparently qualified." Dae-ho is older than I expected, mid-40s, the specific weathered quality of someone whose body remembers being exceptional even as it now moves with careful, deliberate caution around old damage. He studies me with the professional assessment of a veteran evaluating new information, rather than the casual dismissal I've grown accustomed to from most people who meet me. Seo-yeon says you're training to genuine muscular failure, every session. He doesn't phrase it as a question. "Show me your potential readout." I hesitate. The system window remains invisible to everyone except me, and I've shared its existence with exactly no one, including Seo-yeon, who's noticed the physical results without ever asking about the underlying mechanic. "I can't show you directly," I say, "but I can tell you what it says." Dae-ho listens as I explain the mechanic: training to true failure producing measurable stat growth, light training producing negligible gain, the specific 4 categories of strength, endurance, speed, and reaction that seem to respond to different types of exertion. His expression shifts through several stages of professional recalibration as I speak. Mild interest deepening into genuine focus by the time I finish. Pure physical growth, gated behind training intensity, with no elemental or unique component at all. He says it slowly, working through implications. That's rare. Most awakened potentials manifest something distinctive: fire, enhanced senses, weapon affinity. A pure stat growth mechanic without any qualitative special ability is almost primitive by comparison. Which makes it weak, I finish, the word that's defined every self-assessment I've made since the blue window first appeared. Predictable, Dae-ho corrects. Primitive doesn't mean weak. It means the growth follows understood, controllable variables rather than mysterious innate talent. If I can identify exactly what triggers failure threshold gains for each stat category, I can build you a training program that maximizes growth efficiency instead of leaving it to random improvised effort. Over the following weeks, Daeho transforms my instinctive, exhausting approach into something considerably more scientific. He measures my specific failure points across different exercise types, discovering that compound lifts, squats, deadlifts, presses trigger the sharpest strength gains when pushed to true failure, that interval sprints produce disproportionate speed and endurance growth compared to steady-state cardio, that reactive drills, dodging thrown objects, sparring exchanges push past the point of exhausted reflexes, feed specifically into reaction stat growth in ways no other training method matches. He also introduces the concept I hadn't considered in my initial undisciplined enthusiasm. Recovery matters as much as effort. You can't train to failure every single day indefinitely, he explains, during a session where I'm forced, against every instinct telling me more effort always equals more progress, to actually rest. Muscles don't grow during the workout. They grow during recovery, when the body repairs and reinforces what the training damaged. Train to failure without adequate recovery, and you're not accumulating growth, you're accumulating damage that eventually produces injury instead of progress. The correction proves necessary within the first week of ignoring it. I pushed through a leg session 2 days after a similarly brutal one, and the resulting joint strain cost me 3 additional recovery days beyond what proper periodization would have required. A lesson in diminishing returns that no amount of raw enthusiasm can argue against once the actual data confirms it. Diet enters the equation similarly. Daeho's blunt assessment of my convenience store nutrition regimen, you're trying to build a house while feeding the construction crew garbage, leads to specific dietary adjustments that, combined with proper periodization, transform my training from chaotic, unsustainable effort into structured, compounding progression. 2 months into this refined regimen, my stats read considerably different than the pathetic baseline that first appeared after the shelving incident. Strength, 24, endurance, 21, speed, 18, reaction, 20, still below the average awakened baseline that most hunters begin their careers with, but no longer catastrophically so. The specific, steady accumulation of consistent, properly structured effort, finally producing numbers that don't read as an embarrassment. Registration as an official hunter requires completing a supervised E-rank dungeon clearance, standard procedure for anyone claiming awakened status, verifying that stated abilities translate into actual combat competence against low-threat monsters. The dungeon assigned to me is unremarkable by hunter standards. Goblin-type monsters, weak individually, manageable in small numbers by anyone with baseline combat capability. For most awakened candidates, particularly those with elemental or unique abilities, it's barely a formality. For me, entering with nothing except trained physical stats and 0 actual combat technique, it's a genuine test. I clear it clumsily. My first goblin encounter nearly ends badly. I telegraph my attacks with the specific inexperience of someone who's never actually fought anything, and only my trained reaction stat, still modest by hunter standards, but considerably better than my untrained baseline, allows me to avoid a strike that would have opened my side to the bone, but I recover. I compensate for lack of technique with the brute persistence that training has made my defining characteristic, outlasting goblins through endurance that lets me keep fighting past the point where a less conditioned civilian would collapse, landing enough accumulated hits through raw strength to eventually overcome creatures that outmatch my combat skill but not my physical capacity to simply keep going. I clear the dungeon. Officially registered as an E-rank hunter, the lowest formal rank, but a rank nonetheless, the first official confirmation that whatever this potential actually amounts to, it's functional enough to meet baseline professional standards. The registration center processing my paperwork includes the standard field for special ability that every hunter's file requires. I watch the clerk's expression shift through confusion, then something close to pity when I explain there isn't one, just stat growth through training, no elemental affinity, no unique manifestation. That's unusual, she says, the specific diplomatic phrasing that means considerably more judgment than the words themselves convey. Most people find that combination challenging to build a career around. I'm aware. Choi Baram registers at the same center that same afternoon. Coincidence that neither of us anticipated. He's already C rank, an effective fire manipulation ability, trained and refined since his own awakening 2 years earlier, the specific confidence of someone whose career trajectory has never required questioning whether his potential was adequate. He recognizes me immediately, the specific double take of someone encountering an old classmate in an unexpected context. Junho, you awakened too? Recently, huh? Small world. He doesn't say it cruelly. Baram was never actively malicious in school, just casually, thoughtlessly dismissive in the specific way popular, capable kids often are toward peers who occupy a different tier of the social and physical hierarchy. He glances at my registration paperwork, visible on the counter between us, and his expression shifts towards something between surprise and awkward amusement. No special ability? That's rough, man. Good luck with that. The old reflex, shrink, apologize, minimize my own presence in the conversation, activates automatically. But something underneath it, something 2 months of measurable, hard-won progress has started building, resists complete collapse into the old pattern. Thanks, I say. Simple, not deferential, not apologetic, just acknowledgement. Baram studies me for an extra beat, perhaps registering something slightly different in my tone than the Junho he remembers from school hallways, but doesn't comment further before heading toward his own registration appointment. I don't fully understand in that moment why the brief exchange feels significant. I only recognize, walking out of the registration center with my official E-rank credentials, that I didn't shrink as completely as the old version of myself would have. That evening, I visit my mother in the hospital. Routine visit, the specific quiet ritual that structured my life for 2 years, regardless of what else happens during any given day. She's stable, treatment progressing as well as her condition permits, though the financial weight of ongoing care remains a constant pressure I've never fully voiced to her directly. She doesn't know about the awakening. I haven't found the right way to explain a system window only I can see, stats that measure invisible potential, a life trajectory that's shifted in ways I'm still processing myself. I sit beside her bed, watching her sleep, thinking about Daeho's mention, offhand, during a training session, that the annual National Hunter Tournament offers substantial prize money and sponsorship opportunities for anyone who performs well, regardless of rank or ability type. I've never considered myself tournament material, never considered myself hunter material at all until 3 months ago. But watching my mother's careful, shallow breathing, calculating the specific gap between what her treatment currently costs and what better, more comprehensive care would require, a goal crystallizes that's considerably more concrete than my initial vague motivation of simply not being weak anymore. Money. Enough money that her treatment stops being a monthly calculation of what corners can be cut, what care can be delayed, what comfort can be sacrificed for basic survival. I don't know if you can hear me, I tell her quietly, the specific one-sided conversation that's become routine during these visits. But I think something's changed. I think I might actually be able to do something about this. Give me some time to figure out exactly what. She doesn't stir. The machines monitoring her vitals continue their steady, indifferent rhythm. I sit with her another hour before the visiting window closes, then return to my apartment, to the makeshift training equipment that's slowly being supplemented by proper gym access, to the specific, exhausting routine that's become, in 3 months, less an obligation and more the first genuine purpose I've ever structured my life around. Tomorrow, more training. More failure, pursued deliberately rather than feared. More small, measurable increments building towards something I'm only beginning to understand the actual shape of. The blue window flickers, patient, in my peripheral vision as I finally allow myself to sleep. 23 years of being last. 3 months of genuine progress. A mother who needs help I might, improbably, actually be capable of providing. I close my eyes, already anticipating tomorrow's training with something that feels, for the first time in longer than I can clearly remember, close to actual hope. 3 months of properly structured failure threshold training compress what would typically require years of gradual hunter development into a timeline that starts drawing attention from people who track such things professionally. E rank to D rank in 11 weeks. Not unprecedented for a talented, awakened individual with a strong elemental affinity, but genuinely unusual for someone whose entire mechanic consists of gets measurably stronger through training intensity most hunters consider unnecessarily punishing. Deho tracks the progression with the specific satisfaction of a scientist watching a hypothesis confirm itself repeatedly. Your growth curve is accelerating, not just accumulating linearly. Each threshold you push past seems to make the next threshold slightly more achievable. Your body's adapting to extreme exertion faster than baseline human physiology typically permits. Is that normal? For awakened potential? Nothing about your specific mechanic is normal, Junho. Most awakened abilities don't scale with pure effort the way yours does. You're essentially exploiting the only variable that responds directly and proportionally to willingness to suffer, which most people, understandably, aren't eager to maximize. D-rank dungeons introduce genuine tactical complexity beyond the straightforward goblin clearing of E-rank certification. Coordinated monster groups, environmental hazards, the specific requirement for actual strategy rather than simple attrition through superior physical conditioning. Seoyeon, whose own D-rank certification and years of practical dungeon experience make her invaluable beyond simple gym supervision, begins accompanying me on actual contracted dungeon clears, not as my trainer exclusively, but as tactical partner, the specific division of labor that develops naturally between someone who reads dungeon layouts and monster behavior patterns expertly and someone who provides the raw physical capability to execute whatever strategy that reading suggests. You compensate for lack of technique with pure output, she observes. After we clear a particularly challenging D-rank dungeon that required navigating a coordinated group of armored beast-type monsters, most hunters your rank rely on precision, efficient technique, minimizing wasted effort. You just absorb punishment and keep producing force until something breaks. It shouldn't work as well as it does. Does it bother you, watching me fight like that? She considers the question with genuine thought rather than reflexive reassurance. It used to. Now I mostly find it useful. Ugly, brute force effectiveness is still effectiveness. I stopped caring about elegant technique a long time ago, once I learned what actually keeps hunters alive. Her own history, revealed gradually over months of increasing trust, provides context for that particular cynicism. 8 years stuck at D rank despite genuine skill and dedication, a career trajectory that stalled not through lack of capability, but through a specific incident in her early 20s that she references obliquely without full detail, a refused guild recruitment, followed by years of mysteriously difficult contract assignments and unexplained professional obstacles that never quite added up to provable sabotage, but never stopped accumulating either. I don't fully understand the significance of her history until Gilded Crown Guild's representative approaches me directly 3 months after my D-rank certification, following a particularly public dungeon clear that draws unusual media attention. The clear itself wasn't extraordinary by objective standards. A D-rank dungeon, cleared efficiently, nothing that would typically generate coverage. What generates interest is the specific angle a freelance, hunter-focused journalist identifies. An awakened individual with zero elemental or unique ability, progressing purely through physical stat growth, achieving results that outpace many hunters with genuine special talents. The abilityless hunter becomes the specific headline that starts circulating hunter forums and eventually mainstream news within days. The kind of underdog narrative that generates public fascination, regardless of how uncomfortable it makes certain established interests. Gilded Crown Guild's representative, a polished, professionally warm woman named Director Yang, arranges a meeting through official channels within a week of the coverage spreading. Gilded Crown recognizes exceptional potential, she says, in a meeting room that radiates the specific understated luxury of an organization with substantial resources and even more substantial confidence in its own importance. Your story resonates with the public in ways that could benefit both your career and our guild's public profile considerably. We'd like to offer full sponsorship, training resources, equipment, tournament pathway access, financial support that would let you focus entirely on development rather than maintaining outside employment. The offer, presented in isolation, sounds genuinely appealing. Everything my current improvised, resource-constrained training approach struggles against, offered without the specific financial pressure that's defined every major decision of my adult life. What would you need in exchange? I ask, the specific caution that months of Daeho's guidance has cultivated alongside physical training. Never accept terms without understanding their full scope. Standard guild affiliation. Your competitive activities would represent Gilded Crown exclusively. Training oversight would incorporate our own methodology alongside whatever approach you're currently using. Tournament participation would proceed through our official channels rather than independent registration. Director Yang's smile remains warm, professional, the specific practice quality of someone who's delivered this exact pitch many times successfully. Standard terms, really. Most successful hunters operate within guild structures precisely because the resources justify the affiliation. I bring the offer to Daeho that evening, expecting, based on his own extensive hunter world experience, either enthusiastic endorsement or neutral practical assessment. His reaction is neither. Don't sign anything, he says immediately, with the specific weight of genuine concern rather than casual advice. Gilded Crown sponsorship terms typically include control provisions that extend considerably beyond standard affiliation. Tournament outcomes, contract assignments, public statements, all subject to guild approval that serves their institutional interests first and your actual career second. You know this specifically, or you're speculating based on general guild dynamics? I know rumors, persistent ones, across years of hunter community whispers. Independent hunters who declined Gilded Crown sponsorship subsequently experiencing unusual difficulties. Delayed rank promotions despite qualifying performance. Dungeon assignments that seem calibrated slightly beyond appropriate difficulty for the assigned rank. Nothing ever provable in isolation, but the pattern persists too consistently across too many independent accounts to dismiss as simple coincidence. Seoyeon, present for the conversation, finally offers the specific detail she's kept vague for months. I was offered similar terms 8 years ago. Different director, same fundamental structure. I refused. I wanted to build my career on my own merit, not become another face in their sponsored roster. Her expression carries old, still present bitterness. My rank progression stalled within a month. Contracts that should have been straightforward suddenly required additional safety reviews that delayed my applications for weeks. Dungeon assignments that matched my rank on paper turned out to contain monster densities that felt considerably higher than standard classifications suggested. Nothing I could ever formally prove was sabotage rather than bureaucratic incompetence or bad luck. But 8 years of accumulated bad luck, specifically following my refusal, tells its own story. The information reframes Director Yang's polished offer into something considerably more calculating than simple recognition of talent, not genuine interest in my development. Strategic acquisition of a public relations-friendly underdog story, wrapped in sponsorship terms that would, if Seoyeon's experience generalizes, eventually constrain my actual autonomy in exchange for resources I could theoretically develop independently given sufficient time. I'm declining, I tell Daeho and Seoyeon, the decision arriving with more confidence than I expected from someone whose entire life has been characterized by conflict avoidance rather than principled refusal. If the resources come with that level of control, they're not worth the trade-off. That's a genuinely risky decision, Daeho says, though his tone carries approval rather than caution. Independent path means slower resource accumulation, less institutional support heading into a tournament that Gilded Crown's sponsored hunters will dominate through exactly the resources you're refusing. Slower, maybe. But mine. Director Yang's response to my formal refusal, delivered through the same polished professional channel as the original offer, contains no visible displeasure, simply gracious acknowledgement that I've chosen a different path and well wishes for my continued independent development. The consequences arrive within 2 weeks, subtle enough that each individual incident could plausibly represent bureaucratic coincidence rather than deliberate pattern, but accumulating with the specific persistence Seoyeon warned me to expect. My next dungeon contract application, routine D rank clearance, standard procedure, I've completed successfully multiple times already, encounters unexplained processing delays that push my next available assignment back 3 weeks beyond typical scheduling. When the assignment finally clears, the specific dungeon designation carries monster density classifications that read, according to Seoyeon's experienced assessment, meaningfully higher than standard D-rank difficulty typically presents. This isn't a coincidence, she says, reviewing the assignment details with the specific grim recognition of pattern repetition. This is exactly what happened to me. They can't directly refuse your registration or explicitly punish your refusal. That would be provable retaliation. But they can make your path marginally more difficult in ways that never quite cross into deniable sabotage. Daeho reviews the same assignment with his own veteran perspective, confirming Seoyeon's assessment through independent analysis of the dungeon's classified threat parameters. This is survivable. Difficult, but survivable, especially with your current stat progression. I suspect that's deliberate. Punish the refusal without creating an incident severe enough to generate formal complaint or investigation. I process the implications with the specific cold clarity that months of training discipline has cultivated alongside physical growth. Gilded Crown Guild isn't simply a dominant institution earning its position through superior hunters and resources. It's actively, systematically constraining independent competition through mechanisms subtle enough to avoid accountability while persistent enough to matter. We clear it anyway, I tell Seoyeon and Daeho, the specific determination that's replaced my old reflexive conflict avoidance somewhere across the preceding months of measurable progress. Harder than it should be, but we clear it, and we start paying closer attention to exactly how deep this pattern actually runs. Seoyeon nods, already shifting into tactical planning mode for the harder-than-standard assignment ahead. Daeho's expression carries something between concern and the specific satisfaction of watching a mentee develop backbone he wasn't certain existed 3 months earlier. The dungeon clears successfully, 3 days later, through a combination of Seoyeon's tactical guidance and my own continued brutal training regimen, finally producing stats sufficient to absorb the artificially elevated difficulty without catastrophic failure. But the experience crystallizes something that's been building since Director Yang's polished offer first arrived. This isn't simply about personal advancement anymore. Somewhere beneath Gilded Crown's public reputation as Korea's premier hunter guild, a pattern of institutional coercion operates against anyone unwilling to accept their terms. I don't yet know the full scope. I don't yet know how deep the corruption extends, how many careers like Seoyeon's have been quietly constrained across years of accumulated coincidence. But I know, finishing that unnecessarily brutal dungeon clearance with muscles screaming past every previous threshold I've pushed through, that the tournament ahead has become something considerably more significant than simple personal validation. It's become the specific, concrete opportunity to prove that talent and institutional favor aren't the same thing as legitimate merit, and potentially to expose exactly how far Gilded Crown Guild has gone to ensure that distinction never gets tested publicly. The blue window flickers, tracking incremental stat growth from the day's exertion, patient and indifferent to the larger conflict its simple mechanic has somehow positioned me at the center of. I train harder. The tournament approaches, and somewhere in Seoul's polished guild headquarters, an organization that's grown accustomed to controlling outcomes is about to discover that not every variable bends to institutional pressure. Some people just keep training past the point where quitting would be reasonable. Stats crossing the psychological 100-point threshold feel different than the steady accumulation that preceded them. Not just numbers climbing, but a specific, tangible shift in what my body can actually accomplish without the internal negotiation that used to precede every physical demand. Strength, 55. Endurance, 50. Speed, 45. Reaction, 48. Daeho reviews the numbers with the specific analytical intensity that's defined our working relationship since the first conversation about my potential's mechanics. These are approaching lower B rank territory. For someone officially still registered as C rank, that's a significant discrepancy. The registration delays, he confirms, the specific grimness that Gilded Crown's ongoing bureaucratic friction has produced in even his normally measured demeanor. Your actual combat capability has outpaced your official classification specifically because the classification process itself has been quietly obstructed. That's its own kind of evidence, if we ever need to present a formal case. The national tournament's qualification structure requires C-rank minimum certification, a bar I've technically cleared, however delayed the official paperwork, which means the regional qualifying rounds remain accessible despite Gilded Crown's continued friction. I train through the following weeks with an intensity that pushes even Daeho's careful periodization to its practical limits. Not recklessly, but with the specific focus of someone who understands with increasing clarity that the tournament represents more than personal validation. It's the one venue where guild influence over judging and dungeon assignment can't as easily obstruct outcomes, because tournament matches happen in direct, publicly witnessed combat rather than administratively controlled dungeon parameters. The regional qualifying round pairs me, through tournament bracket randomization that I initially assume is coincidental, against Choi Baram. He's progressed considerably since our brief registration center encounter months earlier. His fire manipulation ability, refined through what's clearly been intensive, well-resourced training, the specific technical polish that comes from years of dedicated development rather than my own comparatively recent physical transformation, Junho. He acknowledges me at the pre-match staging area with the specific confidence of someone who's already mentally filed this match as a formality. Didn't expect to actually face you, should be quick, maybe. The match begins with Baram's clear tactical assumption confirmed in his opening approach. Fire projection from range, testing my reaction without closing to melee distance, where his own physical conditioning, adequate but not exceptional. The specific gap that comes from prioritizing ability refinement over raw physical development would matter less than his ranged advantage. I closed distance instead of attempting to avoid it entirely. My trained speed and reaction stats, while still below what a dedicated speed-type ability might provide, prove sufficient to close the gap faster than Baram's targeting adjustments anticipate, turning his ranged advantage into a liability the moment melee range becomes unavoidable. The exchange that follows tests every hour of Daeho's structured training against genuine, high-stakes combat pressure. Baram's fire manipulation, at close range, becomes considerably more dangerous. Concentrated bursts rather than projected bolts, forcing me to absorb damage my endurance stat, however developed, still registers as genuinely painful. But pain, I've learned across months of training to failure, isn't the same as inability to continue. I press forward through burns that would have ended the match against a less conditioned opponent, my strength stat translating into strikes that Baram's own physical conditioning, trained for ability support rather than direct combat durability, can't fully absorb. The match ends not through a single decisive blow, but through the specific grinding attrition that's become my signature approach. Baram's ability, powerful in bursts, requires recovery periods between maximum intensity uses that my sustained physical pressure doesn't allow him time to properly manage. His movements slow, fractionally, as ability fatigue accumulates. Mine don't slow nearly as much because endurance built through genuine failure threshold training scales differently than ability-dependent stamina. I land the final sequence during a brief window where Baram's guard drops, exhausted, the specific opening that months of training have taught me to recognize and exploit without hesitation. He doesn't get up immediately. When he does, his expression carries genuine bewilderment rather than simple sportsmanlike acceptance of defeat. "How?" he asks, once the match officials confirm the result and the crowd's surprised murmur settles into something closer to genuine interest. "I've trained for 2 years. Real ability, real refinement. You're supposed to be the guy with nothing. I trained. Every day, to actual failure every session. That shouldn't work against a real ability. Apparently it does anyway." Something shifts in his expression. Not resentment, but the specific recalibration of someone confronting evidence that contradicts a lifetime assumption about how talent and effort relate to each other. "I used to think you were just behind, permanently," Like some people just don't have what it takes, and that's fine. That's just how it works. He extends a hand, the gesture carrying genuine respect rather than performed graciousness. I don't think that anymore. I accept the handshake, the specific moment carrying more weight than the simple tournament victory alone would justify. Not vindication against a childhood bully, exactly, since Barham was never cruel enough to require that specific narrative, but confirmation that the years of casual dismissal, the good luck with that attitude toward my abilityless classification, rested on an assumption that months of genuine effort have now concretely disproven. I clear the regional qualification, national tournament placement confirmed. That evening, Seoyeon and I share a simple meal at a small restaurant near the gym, the specific quiet celebration that neither of us frames as particularly dramatic, despite the significance of the day's outcome. 8 years, she says, partway through the meal, the specific unprompted vulnerability that months of partnership have gradually made possible between us. I've been stuck at D rank for 8 years, ever since I refused Gilded Crown at 20. Watching you fight today, she pauses, working through the sentence's actual weight before continuing. Watching you fight today, I saw the career trajectory that got taken from me. Not identical, but close enough that it matters. You think you would have made it further without the interference? I know I would have. I was good, Junho. Not exceptional, but genuinely good before the guild decided my refusal needed consequences. Her expression carries old grief that's clearly been processed but never fully resolved. Seeing you push through everything they've tried to place in your path, it's not just professional satisfaction anymore. It's personal. Don't lose. Not for your own sake alone. For everyone who got quietly stalled the way I did before anyone thought to actually fight back. The specific weight of her investment reframes my own understanding of what the tournament represents, not simply personal validation or financial security for my mother's treatment, though both remain genuinely important, but something considerably larger, a chance to demonstrate publicly and undeniably that institutional gatekeeping doesn't have to be the final word on anyone's trajectory. I won't lose, I tell her, the specific confidence that months of measurable, hard-won progress have gradually built, replacing what would once have been reflexive, anxious hedging. Not because I'm certain I'm the strongest hunter in the tournament, because I know exactly how hard I'm willing to work, and I haven't found the actual limit of that yet. Seoyeon studies me for a long moment, something warm breaking through her usual measured professionalism. 8 years of cynicism, and you're the first person who's made me believe effort might actually matter more than institutional favor in the specific venue where it's supposed to count most. We'll find out together. She raises her glass, the specific informal toast that feels considerably more significant than the simple gesture suggests. To finding out. I return home that night, check on training logs, confirm tomorrow's structured recovery day that Daeho's periodization requires even now, especially now, heading into the tournament's more demanding schedule. The blue window flickers, quiet confirmation of stats that continue climbing, slower now as diminishing returns require increasingly extreme effort for equivalent gains, but climbing nonetheless. 23 years of being last. 4 months of measurable progress, a tournament ahead that's become considerably more significant than simple personal achievement. I sleep, the specific, exhausted, satisfied sleep of someone who's pushed genuinely hard and confirmed again that the effort produces real results. Tomorrow, recovery, briefly, before the harder work resumes. The national stage waits. I intend to be ready for it. The national tournament's approach accelerates everything. Training intensity, media attention, and, inevitably, Gilded Crown Guild's mounting concern about the specific narrative developing around the abilityless hunter whose independent path keeps producing results their institutional model insists shouldn't be possible. Daeho begins parallel work alongside my continued training, leveraging old A-rank connections that a 5-year retirement hasn't fully severed. I'm making calls, he tells me, during a training session break that's become as much strategic briefing as physical recovery. Quietly, people who left hunting careers earlier than their talent should have allowed, around the same patterns Seoyeon experienced. The results, accumulated over several weeks of careful, deniable inquiry, paint a picture considerably more extensive than Seoyeon's individual experience suggested. 3 former C-rank hunters across the preceding 6 years, whose promising careers stalled through remarkably similar patterns following Gilded Crown sponsorship refusals. Bureaucratic delays, artificially elevated dungeon assignments, contract processing friction that never quite crossed into provable sabotage but consistently produced the same practical outcome. 2 documented accidents during high-stakes tournament preliminary rounds, independent hunters performing unexpectedly well against Gilded Crown's sponsored competitors, suffering equipment failures or unexplained injuries during preparation that removed them from competition before final matches could test their actual capability against the guild's favored candidates. Seoyeon, working her own network of hunter contacts with the specific thoroughness of someone finally pursuing answers she'd previously accepted as simply career bad luck, uncovers testimony from a former Gilded Crown administrative employee, anonymous, understandably cautious given the institution's evident willingness to apply pressure, but specific enough to suggest documented financial irregularities connecting guild leadership to several tournament judging panel members. Bribery, she says, presenting the accumulated evidence during a late-night strategy session at Daeho's apartment, the specific location chosen for its distance from Gilded Crown's established surveillance patterns near my gym and apartment. Not proven yet, not with documentation that would survive formal legal scrutiny, but the pattern is consistent enough that coincidence stops being a credible explanation. I process the accumulated evidence with the specific weight of understanding that this extends considerably beyond my own personal grievance. How many careers total, across however many years this has been operating? We don't know the full scope, Daeho admits. What we're seeing is just the visible pattern among people willing to talk, even anonymously. The actual number could be considerably higher. The moral calculation that follows occupies several days of internal conflict I don't fully share with either Seoyeon or Daeho, though both likely sense its presence given how visibly it affects my training focus. Continue purely toward tournament victory, using the platform that success provides to eventually address the corruption? Or shift primary focus toward building an actionable case, even if that focus compromises tournament preparation. Daeho, when I finally voice the dilemma directly, offers the specific clarity that's defined his mentorship throughout. You can do both. Victory without exposure is a personal triumph that changes nothing structural. Exposure without victory is an accusation that lacks the public weight to force real accountability. You need both for this to actually matter beyond your own career. The threat, when it arrives, removes any remaining abstraction from the conflict. A man I don't recognize approaches me directly outside my mother's hospital, not the polished, professionally warm demeanor of Director Yang's initial recruitment pitch, but something considerably colder, the specific bluntness that emerges once diplomatic pretense stops serving its purpose. Your mother's treatment, he says without preamble, is partially subsidized through a healthcare network that maintains financial relationships with several of Gilded Crown's corporate partners. Relationships that could encounter complications if certain independent investigations continue producing inconvenient publicity before the tournament concludes. The threat's specific construction, never explicit enough to constitute directly provable coercion, precisely calibrated to the same deniable pressure that's characterized every previous Gilded Crown action against me, confirms exactly the institutional pattern Daeho and Seoyeon's investigation has been documenting. I don't respond immediately. 23 years of conflict avoidance suggest one reflexive path. Back away, protect my mother through compliance, abandon the investigation before it produces consequences beyond what I'm willing to risk. But 4 months of training to genuine failure repeatedly has taught me something the old reflexive pattern never accounted for. The moment right before quitting feels reasonable is usually the moment furthest from an actual limit. I understand the message, I tell the man, my voice carrying a steadiness that surprises even me given the stakes involved. I'll take appropriate precautions. He studies me for a moment, apparently expecting either immediate capitulation or emotional confrontation, receiving neither. He departs without further comment, the specific ambiguous threat left hanging without explicit follow-through, exactly calibrated to maximize psychological pressure while maintaining complete deniability. I bring the encounter to Daiho and Seoyeon within the hour, my hands shaking slightly with adrenaline that has nothing to do with physical training and everything to do with genuine fear for someone I love rather than myself. "They're threatening your mother's care directly now," Seoyeon says, her expression carrying the specific fury of someone watching a pattern she's personally experienced escalate against someone else. "That's a significant escalation from bureaucratic friction. We move her," Daeho says, already working through practical logistics with the specific efficiency of a man accustomed to operating under genuine pressure. "Independent clinic, outside whatever network Gilded Crown's corporate partnerships influence. Your tournament winnings from the qualifying rounds should cover the transition costs. The relocation happens within 3 days, careful, deliberate, conducted with enough operational security that Daiho, drawing on old professional habits, insists on that Gilded Crown's monitoring, which we now assume exists, given how precisely targeted their previous pressure has been, doesn't immediately register the change until it's already complete. My mother moved to a private clinic in a different district, initially confused by the sudden transition, finally receives the explanation I've been avoiding for months. I need to tell you something, I say, sitting beside her hospital bed in the new facility, the specific quiet privacy that independent, non-networked care provides feeling considerably safer than our previous arrangement's institutional exposure. About what's happened to me, about why we moved you here. I explain the awakening, the training, the tournament, the guild's escalating pressure, the complete picture I've withheld partly from uncertainty about how to explain something so far outside her frame of reference, partly from the specific instinct to protect her from worry that's characterized our relationship since her illness first began. She listens without interrupting, the specific patient attention that's defined her parenting throughout my life, even through illness that stripped away most of her former physical capability without touching her essential character. "You've been carrying all of this," she says finally, "training every day, facing threats against my care, preparing for a national tournament, and you didn't tell me because you were worried about my stress levels. I didn't want you to worry." Hunyo. Her voice carries the specific gentle firmness that's always accompanied her most important lessons. "I've watched you apologize for existing, your entire life, for a body that never worked the way you wanted it to. Whatever this potential actually is, whatever it's cost you to develop it, I'm not seeing someone who needs protecting from worry. I'm seeing someone who's finally stopped shrinking." The observation lands with weight I hadn't fully processed myself, viewing my own transformation primarily through the lens of stat numbers and tactical progression rather than the deeper psychological shift Daeho and Seoyeon have both, in their own ways, been gently pointing toward for months. I'm scared, I admit, the specific vulnerability that 4 months of physical training hasn't fully erased, even as it's built genuine confidence in entirely different areas. Of the guild. Of what they might still do. Of whether I'm actually capable of finishing what I've started. "Good," she says, with the specific practical wisdom that illness has apparently sharpened rather than diminished. "Fear means you understand the actual stakes. It's not the same as weakness. You've spent your whole life confusing the two." I stay with her longer than the clinic's official visiting hours technically permit, the staff apparently willing to overlook minor policy violations for a patient whose son has just demonstrated considerably more backbone than his physical stature initially suggested. Walking back to the gym that evening, processing the accumulated weight of the day, the threat, the relocation, the conversation that's finally brought my mother fully into the reality I've been navigating alone for months, I feel something shift into clearer focus than the tournament preparation alone had previously provided. This isn't just about proving my own capability anymore, or even simply about securing better treatment for my mother's condition, though both remain genuinely important. It's about refusing to let institutional intimidation dictate the boundaries of what someone like me, someone the system has already dismissed as inadequate, abilityless, unworthy of serious consideration, is allowed to accomplish. Seoyeon meets me at the gym entrance, her expression carrying the specific readiness of someone who spent the day continuing investigation work while I handled the immediate family crisis. "Your mother's settled?" she asks. "Settled? Safe? She knows everything now. How did she take it?" I consider the question working through my mother's specific reaction, not fear, not simple pride, but something closer to recognition of a change she'd apparently been waiting to see confirmed. She said, "I've finally stopped shrinking." Seoyeon's expression softens into something warmer than her usual measured professionalism typically permits. She's right. I've noticed it too these past few months. You don't apologize for taking up space anymore. Old habit, dying slowly, dying anyway. That's what matters. She gestures toward the gym's interior where Daeho waits with tomorrow's training schedule already prepared despite the day's exhausting developments. Ready to keep pushing? I think about the threat, about the accumulated evidence of Gilded Crown's corruption, about the tournament that's approaching faster than feels entirely comfortable, about my mother's specific hard-won observation regarding who I've apparently become across these past several months of genuine failure threshold effort. Always, I say, that's the only setting I've got left. We move inside, toward tomorrow's training, toward whatever confrontation the tournament and the accumulated evidence against Gilded Crown eventually produce. The blue window flickers, patient as always, tracking whatever incremental growth tonight's session will produce. 23 years of shrinking. 4 months of learning not to. A mother finally aware of the transformation. A guild that's discovered threatening my family doesn't produce the compliance their pattern usually generates. The tournament approaches, the investigation continues, and somewhere beneath Gilded Crown's polished public reputation, an accumulating weight of evidence waits for the specific moment when exposure will matter most. I train. The work continues, heavier now with genuine stakes, but no less determined for the added weight. The National Tournament Arena holds 40,000 spectators, with broadcast coverage extending that audience to a considerable percentage of the country's population watching from home. I've fought through 5 preliminary matches over the preceding 2 weeks, each one a genuine test against hunters whose elemental or unique abilities represent years of specialized development, each one won through the same fundamental approach that's defined my entire hunter career: absorb what my opponent's technique delivers, outlast their resource limitations, close whatever gap remains through pure accumulated physical capability. The specific pattern draws increasing media attention as the tournament progresses. The abilityless hunter evolves from dismissive curiosity to genuine underdog narrative, the kind of story that resonates precisely because it contradicts the specific hierarchy most awakened individuals have grown up accepting. That unique ability determines destiny. That pure effort without special talent represents, at best, a consolation path rather than genuine competitive possibility. My final opponent, confirmed 3 days before the championship match, is Gilded Crown Guild's flagship-sponsored hunter, Jin Taewon B rank, an ability combining enhanced physical augmentation with localized gravity manipulation, the specific kind of powerful, versatile talent that Guild resources have spent years refining into tournament-optimized perfection. The morning of the final, Daeho and Seoyeon execute the plan we've spent weeks preparing, not waiting for the match's outcome to determine whether exposure serves our purposes, but presenting accumulated evidence directly to tournament officials and assembled press immediately before the championship match begins, ensuring the revelation can't be dismissed as sour grapes following a loss. The press conference, held in a side room adjacent to the arena's main press facilities, draws immediate, intense attention the moment Daeho's reputation as a respected former A-rank hunter lends institutional credibility to what might otherwise be dismissed as unsubstantiated accusation. We have documented testimony, Daeho announces, presenting organized files to the assembled journalists from multiple former hunters whose careers were systematically obstructed following refusal of Gilded Crown Guild sponsorship. We have financial records suggesting improper payments to tournament judging panel members across multiple competitive seasons. We have pattern evidence connecting at least 2 documented accidents during tournament preliminary rounds to competitors who posed unexpected threats to Gilded Crown's sponsored hunters. The specific chaos that follows, journalists shouting questions, tournament officials visibly scrambling to process accusations arriving mere hours before a nationally broadcast championship match, Gilded Crown's public relations representatives attempting damage control that clearly wasn't prepared for this specific timing, confirms exactly the impact Daeho predicted. Too public, too immediate, too well documented to simply suppress or delay past the match's conclusion. Tournament officials, faced with accusations that can't be responsibly ignored, but also can't be fully investigated before the scheduled championship match, make the specific compromise that satisfies neither side completely. The match proceeds as scheduled, while an official investigation into the presented evidence begins immediately, with results to be announced regardless of the match's outcome. I enter the arena for the championship match carrying weight considerably beyond simple competitive stakes. Not just personal validation or tournament victory, but the specific, immediate test of whether genuine merit can prevail even as institutional corruption faces public exposure in real time. Jin Taewon enters from the opposite tunnel, his expression carrying the specific controlled confidence of someone who's been assured, presumably by guild leadership operating in full crisis management mode, that the match itself remains unaffected by the unfolding scandal. Heard about the accusations, he says, during the standard pre-match acknowledgement that tournament protocol requires. Guild says it's baseless. Personal vendetta from a bitter has-been and his charity case. We'll let the investigation determine that. This match is separate, is it? Feels like you're trying to win two different fights simultaneously. Maybe. I've had practice managing more than my body initially seemed capable of handling. The match begins with Taewon's full combination ability immediately apparent. Gravity manipulation creating localized zones of increased weight that restrict my movement. Augmented physical strikes delivered with enhanced speed and power that exceeds anything my previous opponents demonstrated. The opening exchanges favor him decisively. My speed stat, while considerably developed compared to my starting baseline, can't fully compensate for gravity fields that add genuine physical resistance to every movement I attempt. Strikes that connect carry augmented force considerably beyond standard B-rank baseline, testing my endurance in ways previous matches haven't approached. I absorb damage that would have ended the match against a less conditioned opponent. The specific accumulated toughness that months of training to genuine failure has built into my capacity to continue functioning past pain thresholds that would incapacitate someone without equivalent conditioning. The match's turning point arrives not through a single decisive counter, but through the specific attrition pattern that's defined every significant victory across my hunter career. Taewon's combination ability, powerful but resource-intensive, requires periodic recovery that his years of guild-optimized training have refined but not eliminated entirely. I press continuously, refusing the recovery windows that most opponents unconsciously grant through their own fatigue-driven pacing. My endurance stat, built specifically through refusing to stop at the point where stopping feels reasonable, allowing sustained output that Taewon's ability-dependent stamina model doesn't anticipate facing. By the match's 15th minute, considerably longer than tournament finals typically extend, Taewon's gravity manipulation begins showing fractional inconsistency. The specific sign of ability fatigue that Daeho's extensive tactical briefing, based on Seoyeon's careful pre-match scouting, identified as the critical window to watch for. I close distance during a moment where his gravity field weakens. The specific, precise timing that months of reaction stat development have honed into genuine tactical instinct rather than simple reflexive response. My strike connects solidly, augmented physical toughness notwithstanding, at an angle and intensity that his fatigued defensive positioning can't fully absorb. He staggers, recovers partially. I press the advantage, the specific relentless continuation that's become my signature approach across every significant match this tournament has featured. The final exchange comes 18 minutes into the match, considerably longer than any previous championship bout in recent tournament history. According to the commentary I'll later learn was tracking the specific unprecedented duration in real time. Taewon, exhausted past his ability's sustainable output, attempts a final augmented strike that carries genuine power but insufficient precision, the specific timing error that extended fatigue produces even in highly trained combatants. I don't dodge entirely. My own accumulated damage doesn't permit the clean evasion that fresher reflexes might achieve. I absorb the strike's edge while closing the remaining distance, accepting damage in exchange for positioning that puts my own final blow within reach. The strike lands, full accumulated force built across months of training that started with a scrawny warehouse worker who couldn't complete 5 push-ups without his arms giving out entirely. Taewon goes down, doesn't rise within the count. The arena's reaction registers as a specific, overwhelming wave of sound that takes several seconds to fully process. 40,000 people, plus a broadcast audience considerably larger, witnessing an ability-less hunter defeat Gilded Crown Guild's flagship-sponsored champion in a match that's already inseparable, in public perception, from the corruption scandal unfolding in real time alongside it. I stand in the arena center, breathing hard, body carrying damage that will require considerable recovery time, and process the specific, surreal reality of having actually achieved what 4 months ago would have seemed like impossible fantasy. National tournament champion against an opponent whose resources and refined ability represented everything my own path lacked. Officials announce the result. The crowd's reaction continues, sustained, the specific energy of witnessing something that feels considerably larger than simple sport. Daeho and Seoyeon reach me before the post-match formalities fully begin, their expressions carrying the specific relief and vindication of people who've spent months building toward exactly this convergence of personal victory and institutional exposure. The investigation into Gilded Crown, Seoyeon reports, still processing updates arriving through her phone even amid the match's immediate aftermath, just received emergency government oversight involvement. Too much evidence, too much public attention for the guild's usual damage control to contain. And the match? Completely legitimate. No possible claim that Taewon's loss resulted from anything except you being genuinely, undeniably better in that specific contest. Daeho's expression carries something close to paternal pride, considerably warmer than his usual measured professional demeanor. You just proved in front of the entire country that institutional favor and legitimate merit aren't the same thing. I think about the shelving unit that started this entire trajectory, about 5 push-ups that nearly broke my arms 4 months ago, about a mother who finally knows the truth of what her son has been building toward, about 8 years of Seoyeon's stalled career finally finding vindication through evidence too public to suppress. We did this, I say, the specific plural intentional, acknowledging a victory that was never purely individual despite the solitary nature of the match itself. All 3 of us. Seoyeon's controlled composure finally breaks into something genuinely emotional. Tears she doesn't bother hiding despite the surrounding cameras and continued crowd noise. 8 years, she says. 8 years of believing effort didn't matter as much as institutional connection. You just proved me wrong, in the most public way possible. The arena continues its overwhelming celebration around us. Somewhere beyond the immediate moment, Gilded Crown Guild's carefully constructed public reputation is unraveling in real time. Government investigators are beginning what will become a considerably larger inquiry than tonight's initial scandal, and a scrawny former warehouse worker who spent 23 years apologizing for his own existence stands in the center of a national arena, undisputed champion, having proven something considerably more significant than simple athletic capability. The blue window flickers one final time before the evening's celebrations fully consume my attention. Strength, 71. Endurance, 68. Speed, 61. Reaction, 65. National tournament champion. Confirmed numbers that started at 3, 2, 2, 3. A journey that began with a falling shelf and a moment of desperate, inadequate physical effort that somehow, against every previous pattern of my life, activated something worth building on. The tournament is won. The exposure is public. The investigation continues. But for tonight, standing in an arena full of people who watched genuine effort triumph over institutional favor, I let myself simply feel the specific, hard-won weight of having finally, completely, stopped being last. A month passes between the tournament final and the day Gilded Crown Guild's chairman formally resigns amid a government investigation that's expanded considerably beyond the initial scandal Daeho and Seoyeon's evidence first triggered. The investigation's scope, once government oversight committees gained full subpoena authority, revealed corruption considerably more extensive than even our accumulated evidence initially suggested. systematic bribery across multiple tournament seasons, documented sabotage affecting at least 11 independent hunters over 6 years, financial irregularities connecting guild leadership to several corporate partnerships that had apparently functioned as pressure mechanisms against anyone resistant to sponsorship terms. The Korean Hunter Association, facing public pressure that no amount of institutional damage control could contain, implements sweeping reforms within weeks: independent judging panels insulated from guild financial influence, transparent dungeon assignment algorithms subject to public audit, a formal whistleblower protection framework specifically designed to prevent the kind of career-destroying retaliation that defined Seoyeon's stalled decade, and the documented cases Daeho's investigation uncovered. I'm now officially B rank. The bureaucratic obstruction that kept my classification artificially suppressed resolved within days of the scandal breaking, tournament victory providing undeniable public evidence that no administrative friction could continue justifying delay. The fates of everyone who built this journey alongside me settle into their own trajectories over the following weeks. Seoyeon's 8-year stalled career finally receives the specific vindication that evidence, rather than mere personal conviction, provides. The Reformed Hunter Association's Review Board, examining her original case alongside the broader pattern of documented retaliation, formally acknowledges the Guild's historical interference in her rank progression, not full compensation for 8 lost years, which no bureaucratic process could genuinely restore, but official recognition that reframes her career history from personal failure into institutional injustice. She opens her own training facility within a month of the scandal's resolution, funded partly through tournament winnings I insist on contributing despite her initial reluctance to accept what she calls excessive gratitude. You did the actual fighting, she tells me, the specific stubbornness that's defined her character throughout our partnership. I just pointed out where to hit things. You spent 8 years proving effort matters even when institutions insist otherwise. That's not a small contribution. Her facility specifically targets hunters like the version of myself that first walked into her gym 4 months ago, awakened individuals with unremarkable or entirely absent special abilities, the specific population that traditional guild structures have historically dismissed as poor investment risks. The threshold gym, she names it, the specific reference to failure point training that's become, somewhat unexpectedly, a recognized methodology within reformed hunter training circles. Daeho transitions into an advisory role with the Hunter Association's new oversight committee, his A-rank credentials and first-hand investigative experience proving invaluable for designing systems specifically resistant to the kind of institutional capture that Gilded Crown demonstrated was possible. 5 years of quiet retirement, he tells me, during one of our now less frequent but still regular training consultations, and I finally found something worth coming back for that didn't require my spine cooperating with active combat anymore. Barham, having processed his own tournament loss and the broader scandal's revelations with genuine reflection rather than simple bitterness, becomes an unlikely training partner over subsequent months. Not through any dramatic reconciliation scene, but through the specific practical recognition that studying physical conditioning alongside his own ability refinement produces better combat results than either approach pursued in isolation. I spent 2 years assuming my ability made physical training optional, he admits, during one of our now regular sparring sessions at Seoyeon's new facility. Watching you outlast Taewon, who had genuinely superior raw ability but insufficient physical conditioning to sustain it, that's changed how I think about the whole equation. Talent's still real, it's just not the whole story. No, it's really not. My mother, transferred to increasingly better care as tournament winnings and subsequent sponsorship offers legitimate ones, this time, without Gilded Crown's specific coercive terms, accumulate into genuine financial security, continues her treatment with steadily improving prognosis that her doctors describe cautiously as the most optimistic assessment since her initial diagnosis years earlier. She attends my training sessions occasionally now, on days her strength permits the outing, watching from a chair Seoyeon keeps specifically positioned near the facility's entrance for exactly this purpose. You're still doing it, she observes, during one such visit, watching me complete a training set that ends, as every session still does, in genuine muscular failure. Pushing past the point where stopping would be reasonable. It's not really optional anymore. It's just who I am now. It was always who you could be. You just needed a reason to discover it. She watches me rack the weights, breathing hard, the specific exhausted satisfaction that's defined every training session since that first month of undisciplined, desperate effort. I'm proud of you. Not for the tournament or the guild scandal or any of the public recognition, for refusing to stay who you were convinced you had to be. I sit beside her, the specific quiet moment that's become a regular feature of our relationship since she finally learned the complete truth of my transformation. I'm still scared sometimes that the growth stops, that I hit an actual limit eventually, and everything I've built collapses back into who I used to be. Maybe you will hit a limit eventually. Everyone does, in some form or another. Her voice carries the specific wisdom that illness has apparently sharpened alongside its physical toll. But you'll hit it having actually tried, having actually pushed past every limit you previously assumed was permanent. That's different from never trying at all, which is the only life you were living before that shelf fell. The blue window, still present in my peripheral vision, though I've stopped checking it as obsessively as those first desperate weeks, flickers with the specific quiet confirmation of continued, if gradually slowing, growth. Strength, 74. Endurance, 71. Speed, 63. Reaction, 67. Diminishing returns, exactly as Deho predicted months ago. Each additional point requiring increasingly extreme effort as my body approaches whatever ceiling this particular potential ultimately permits. But growth nonetheless, however incremental, confirmation that the mechanic which started this entire journey hasn't stopped rewarding genuine effort, even as that effort requires increasingly extreme commitment to produce equivalent gains. Evening, several weeks after the tournament, at Soyun's Threshold Gym, the same modest facility, expanded now with proper equipment and a small but growing roster of clients specifically drawn to training philosophy built around genuine failure threshold effort rather than comfortable, sustainable moderation. I train alone, the specific late evening session that's become routine once the facility's regular hours end and the more casual clients have departed. Push-ups, the same basic exercise that started this entire trajectory 4 months ago, though the numbers now bear no resemblance to that first pathetic attempt. Failure arrives, eventually, as it always does, the specific point where my arms genuinely cannot execute another repetition regardless of willpower's continued insistence. Strength, 74 to 74.3 small. Almost insultingly small by the standards of those explosive early gains that took me from pathetic baseline to genuine hunter capability within weeks. But real still, the specific, honest confirmation that effort continues producing measurable result, even as the marginal gains shrink toward asymptotic limits I haven't yet fully identified. Seoyeon watches from the front desk, the specific warm familiarity that's replaced her original cynical weariness somewhere across these past several months of shared struggle and eventual, hard-won vindication. Still pushing to failure every session, she says, not quite a question, the specific rhetorical acknowledgement of a pattern she's watched me maintain since the very first week we met. Every session, even now, champion, B rank, guild corruption exposed, mother's care secured. You could ease off, enjoy what you've built without continuing to grind toward diminishing returns. I consider her observation, working through the specific philosophy that's crystallized across 4 months of genuine, hard-won transformation. Failure was never the enemy. I spent 23 years thinking it was, thinking every failed attempt confirmed I was fundamentally, permanently inadequate. Turns out failure was just information. The specific point where growth happens, if you're willing to keep showing up for it. That's going to look good on a motivational poster, if you ever decide corporate sponsorship interests you. I'll leave the posters to people who actually enjoy attention. She laughs, genuine warmth replacing what once would have been reflexive dismissal, and returns to whatever administrative work the gym's continued growth requires. I stand, wipe sweat from my forehead, and prepare for another set, not because glory demands it, not because the tournament requires further validation, not even primarily because my mother's care requires continued financial security that's already largely been secured. I train because failure, genuine and complete, has become something considerably different than the humiliating conclusion it represented for 23 years of my life. It's become the specific, honest threshold where the next version of myself begins. Not guaranteed, not always dramatic, but real, measurable, and mine. The gym's evening quiet settles around me, the same modest space where a scrawny, apologetic warehouse worker first discovered that trying past the point of reasonable exhaustion produced something worth continuing to chase. 23 years of being last. 4 months of measurable transformation, a tournament won, a corrupt institution exposed, a mother healing, a mentor vindicated, a former bully turned respectful training partner. And still, every evening, the same fundamental practice. Push until genuine failure arrives and trust that whatever grows from that threshold is worth the specific, honest cost of reaching it. I begin the next set. The work continues. It always will.